Behind the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, a secret has been buried for decades, one that could shatter the very foundation of the British monarchy. When Queen Elizabeth II private solicitor arrives at Windsor Castle with a sealed envelope bearing the royal seal, the contents within threaten to rewrite history itself. The words "for William's eyes only" are written in the Queen's own hand, but what lies inside challenges everything the royal family believed about duty, succession, and blood. As the parchment unfolds, revealing a truth so devastating it could topple the crown, two future kings find themselves on opposite sides of a battle neither saw coming. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but this one refuses to remain silent. The morning fog clung to Windsor Castle like a shroud, thick and impenetrable, as if nature itself sought to conceal the secrets that lay within the ancient stone walls. Sir Geoffrey Hartwell, the Queen's private solicitor for over 30 years, clutched his leather briefcase tighter as he approached the private entrance to the castle. His hands trembled slightly, not from the October chill, but from the weight of what he carried. Inside that briefcase lay a document that would change everything. The Queen had been gone for 6 months now, and the world had watched as King Charles III settled into his role with the careful precision of a man who had waited his entire life for this moment. The transition had been seamless, dignified, and exactly what the public expected from the House of Windsor. But Geoffrey knew better. He knew that beneath the pageantry and protocol, a storm was brewing, one that would soon tear through the royal family with the force of a hurricane. As he walked through the corridors lined with portraits of monarchs past, Geoffrey's mind drifted back to that final meeting with Queen Elizabeth. It had been just 3 weeks before her death in the private study at Balmoral that she had cherished so deeply. She had appeared frail, yes, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. Her blue eyes, though dimmed by age, still held that steely determination that had defined her 70-year reign. "Geoffrey," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there is something I must tell you, something that has weighed on my conscience for far too long." She had then handed him a sealed envelope, her signature trembling, but unmistakably hers across the wax seal. "This must go to William. Only William. Not Charles. Not anyone else in the family. Promise me." The promise had been given, but fulfilling it would prove to be the most difficult task of Geoffrey's distinguished career. For 6 months, he had wrestled with the implications of what the Queen had confided in him. 6 months of sleepless nights, of watching King Charles embrace his destiny, of seeing Prince William prepare for his own eventual ascension to the throne. And now, finally, the time had come. Prince William was in his private office when Geoffrey was announced. The Prince of Wales had been reviewing agricultural reports from the Duchy of Cornwall, a responsibility that connected him directly to the land and people he would one day serve as king. At 41, William had grown into the role that fate had carved out for him. His once boyish features had matured into the strong jawline and thoughtful expression of a future monarch, and his military bearing reflected the discipline instilled during his years of service. "Sir Geoffrey," William said, rising from behind his mahogany desk, "this is unexpected. How can I help you?" The solicitor's throat felt dry as he set his briefcase on the small conference table near the window. The autumn sunlight streamed through the diamond-paned glass, casting geometric shadows across the Persian rug, shadows that seemed to mirror the complex web of secrets that Geoffrey was about to unravel. "Your Royal Highness," Geoffrey began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment, "I come bearing something from your grandmother. Something she specifically requested I deliver to you personally." William's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. In the months since the Queen's death, he had received countless mementos, letters, and personal effects that she had bequeathed to various family members. Each had been meaningful in its own way, but there was something in Geoffrey's demeanor that suggested this was different. "She made me promise," Geoffrey continued, opening his briefcase with deliberate care, "that this would go only to you." These were her exact words, "for William's eyes only." The envelope that Geoffrey withdrew was cream-colored parchment, heavy and expensive, bearing the Queen's personal seal rather than any official royal marking. William recognized his grandmother's handwriting immediately. The careful script that had signed countless state documents, Christmas cards, and personal notes throughout her long life. But seeing it now, knowing it was among her final written words, sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the autumn air. William accepted the envelope with reverent hands, feeling its weight, not just physical, but metaphysical. Whatever lay within these pages had been important enough for his grandmother to keep secret, important enough to entrust to Geoffrey rather than her private secretary or any other member of the royal household. "Did she say anything else?" William asked, his fingers tracing the edges of the envelope without breaking the seal. Geoffrey hesitated. The Queen's final words echoed in his memory. This will be difficult for him to bear, Geoffrey. But he must know the truth before it's too late, before Charles makes decisions that cannot be undone. But these words felt too heavy to share, too ominous for this moment of delicate revelation. She said, Geoffrey replied carefully, that you would understand when you read it, and that you must act according to your conscience. William nodded slowly, understanding that this was Geoffrey's way of telling him he was now alone with whatever burden his grandmother had chosen to pass to him. The solicitor gathered his briefcase, bowed slightly, and left William alone in the office that suddenly felt much larger and more isolated than it had moments before. With trembling fingers, William broke the wax seal. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room, like the crack of a branch before a mighty tree falls. Inside was a single sheet of the Queen's personal stationery, along with what appeared to be a copy of an older document, yellowed with age and bearing multiple official stamps and signatures. William unfolded his grandmother's letter first, recognizing the careful penmanship that had become more labored in her final years, but remained distinctly hers. "My dearest William," it began, "if you are reading this, then I have gone to join your grandfather, and the burden I have carried for so many years must now pass to you. What I am about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about our family, about the succession, and about your father's right to the throne he now occupies." William's hands began to shake as he read on. The words seemed to swim before his eyes, their meaning so profound that his mind initially rejected them as impossible. In 1952, when I was young and newly crowned, I made a mistake born of love, but a mistake nonetheless. Your grandfather and I, in the early years of our marriage, struggled with conception. We had been trying for an heir for nearly 2 years when we finally conceived Charles. But there are things about that conception, about the circumstances surrounding it, that I have never revealed to anyone, not even to your grandfather in his final years. William's breath caught in his throat. He glanced around the office, as if expecting to find someone watching him, someone who might prevent him from reading further. But he was alone with his grandmother's words, alone with a secret that had been buried for over 70 years. Charles was conceived through a procedure that was considered experimental at the time. The letter continued. We sought help from a private clinic in Switzerland, where discretion was guaranteed and records were malleable. The procedure involved genetic material from a donor, someone chosen for his intellectual and physical characteristics that were deemed suitable for a future monarch. The letter slipped from William's nerveless fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dying leaf. He stood frozen, his mind reeling from the implications of what he had just read. His father, King Charles III, was not the biological son of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. The man who now sat on the throne of England had no legitimate claim to it by blood. But the letter was not finished. With hands that now shook violently, William retrieved it from the floor and forced himself to continue reading. The donor was carefully selected. His grandmother's words continued, but he was not of royal blood. This makes Charles's claim to the throne questionable at best, illegitimate at worst. I have lived with this knowledge for 70 years, watching Charles prepare for a role that may not rightfully be his, knowing that one day I would have to face the consequences of my choices. William sank into his chair, the full weight of the revelation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Everything he had believed about his family, about the natural order of succession, about his father's destiny, and his own, was built on a foundation of lies. "I know this is a terrible burden to place on you, my dear William," the letter concluded, "but you're the only one I trust to handle this knowledge with wisdom and discretion." Attached to this letter is a copy of the original medical records from the Swiss clinic, along with DNA evidence that I had secretly collected and tested 3 years ago. The results are conclusive. William's eyes fell on the second document, the yellowed papers with their official stamps and signatures. Even without reading them in detail, he could see the damning evidence laid out in clinical terms: donor procedures, genetic testing, and medical records that painted a picture of deception stretching back 7 decades. "The choice of what to do with this information is now yours," his grandmother's final words read. "I could not bear to destroy Charles's life with this truth, but neither could I bear to take it to my grave without ensuring that someone knew. The monarchy must survive, but it must survive with integrity. Trust your heart, my darling boy. It has always been true." The letter was signed simply "Your loving grandmother," in the same careful script that had opened it. William sat in stunned silence as the afternoon sun moved across the sky, casting longer shadows through his office windows. The reports from the Duchy of Cornwall lay forgotten on his desk, their concerns about crop yields and agricultural policy seeming absurdly trivial in light of what he had just learned. His father, the King of England, was living a lie. The crown that Charles had finally claimed after a lifetime of waiting was built on deception. And William himself, as the eldest son of Charles, was next in line to inherit a throne that his father had no right to occupy. The implications cascaded through his mind like dominoes falling in an endless chain. If Charles was not the legitimate heir, then the entire line of succession was thrown into question. William's own claim to the throne would be equally questionable, as would that of his children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. The House of Windsor itself might crumble under the weight of this revelation. But even as these thoughts overwhelmed him, William found himself thinking of his father. Charles had devoted his entire life to preparing for the monarchy. He had endured decades of criticism, of being called the reluctant heir, of watching his mother's reign stretch on year after year while he waited in the wings. And now, at the age of 74, he had finally assumed the role he believed was his birthright. How could William destroy that? How could he look his father in the eye, knowing what he now knew, and pretend that nothing had changed? The weight of the secret felt crushing, a burden that threatened to break him under its enormity. As evening fell over Windsor Castle, William remained in his office, the Queen's letter and the medical documents spread across his desk like evidence in a courtroom. He had read and reread every word, hoping to find some alternative interpretation, some way that his grandmother's revelation might be less catastrophic than it appeared. But the evidence was undeniable, the implications inescapable. Somewhere in the castle, he knew that Charles was going about his daily routine, reviewing state papers, meeting with advisors, planning for the future of the realm that he believed he ruled by divine right and royal blood. The tragic irony was not lost on William that his father was unknowingly living a lie that had been carefully constructed to protect both him and the monarchy itself. The question that now haunted William was simple yet impossible. What was he going to do with the truth? Outside his window, the lights of the castle began to flicker on against the gathering darkness, each one a small beacon in the growing night. But for William, the darkness seemed absolute, a shroud that had descended the moment he broke his grandmother's seal and learned the secret that could topple the crown itself. He thought of his wife Catherine, of their children who played in these same corridors where kings and queens had walked for centuries. He thought of a nation that looked to the royal family for stability and continuity in an uncertain world. and he thought of his father, who had finally found peace in the role he believed he was born to fulfill. The choice before William was stark and terrible: preserve the lie that had sustained the monarchy for 7 decades, or reveal the truth that could destroy everything his family had built. Either path would exact a price that seemed too high to pay, yet standing still was no longer an option. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above Windsor Castle, Prince William, heir to a throne that might not rightfully exist, faced the most difficult decision of his life. The hidden will of Queen Elizabeth II had been revealed, and, with it, the power to reshape the destiny of the British crown forever. The only question was whether he would have the courage to use it. 3 days had passed since Geoffrey Hartwell's visit, and William had barely slept. The revelation contained in his grandmother's letter felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, making every breath an effort. He had memorized every word of the documents, studied every detail of the medical records from that Swiss clinic in 1952, and each examination only confirmed what he desperately hoped might be disproven. King Charles III was not the biological son of Queen Elizabeth II. William stood in the morning room at Kensington Palace, staring out at the gardens where his children played with their nanny. Their laughter drifted through the windows, innocent, pure, untainted by the knowledge that their grandfather's claim to the throne might be built on deception. Prince George, now 10 years old, was already beginning to understand his destiny as third in line to the throne. How could William explain to his son that everything they had been taught about their family might be a lie? Catherine entered the room carrying her morning tea, her intuitive understanding of her husband's moods immediately alerting her to his distress. Over 13 years of marriage, she had learned to read the subtle signs of his inner turmoil: the way his shoulders tensed, the distant look in his eyes, the unconscious clenching and unclenching of his fists. "You haven't been sleeping," she observed, settling into the chair beside his. It wasn't a question. William turned from the window, and Catherine was struck by how much older he seemed than just a few days ago. The burden he carried was etched in every line of his face, visible in the shadows under his eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. "Something about the family, about the succession." Catherine set down her teacup, her journalist's instincts immediately alerting her to the gravity of his tone. She had given up her career to marry into the royal family, but the skill she had developed at uncovering hidden truths had never left her. "What is it?" she asked, reaching for his hand. William's fingers closed around hers, drawing strength from her steady presence. If he was going to navigate the treacherous waters ahead, he would need her wisdom, her perspective as someone who had chosen to join the royal family rather than being born into it. "My grandmother left me something," he began, and then slowly, carefully, he told her everything. About Geoffrey's visit, about the letter, about the medical record from Switzerland, and the DNA evidence that shattered everything they thought they knew about Charles's parentage. Catherine listened in stunned silence, her face growing pale as the implications became clear. When William finished, the morning room fell into a quiet so complete that they could hear the distant sound of London traffic beyond the palace walls. "My God," she whispered finally, "your father has no idea?" William shook his head. Grandmother never told him. The secret died with her, or rather, she passed it to me. Catherine rose from her chair and began pacing, her mind working through the ramifications with the analytical precision that had made her an excellent journalist. "The constitutional crisis this could create," she murmured. "If this became public knowledge, it would destroy the monarchy," William finished. "Everything we've worked for, everything the Queen spent 70 years building, would crumble." "But, William," Catherine stopped pacing and faced him directly, "if it's true, and you say the evidence is conclusive, then Charles has no legal right to the throne. He's been crowned under false pretenses." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. William had wrestled with this exact argument for 3 sleepless nights, turning it over and over in his mind until he thought he might go mad from the circular reasoning. "And what about us?" he asked quietly. "If Charles has no right to the throne, then my claim is equally invalid. Our children's future, everything we've planned and prepared for, it's all based on a lie." Catherine sank back in her chair, the full scope of their dilemma finally hitting her. They weren't just dealing with a family secret or even a constitutional crisis. They were facing the potential collapse of everything their children had been born to inherit. "What does the line of succession look like if Charles is illegitimate?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. William had already researched this question exhaustively. It would revert to the Queen's siblings, and would be next in line, then Andrew, then Edward. But even that's complicated because the truth about Charles's parentage could call into question the legitimacy of his siblings as well. If the Queen resorted to donor conception once. He didn't finish the thought, but Catherine understood. The revelation about Charles could potentially unravel the entire royal bloodline of the past 70 years. Meanwhile, across London at Buckingham Palace, King Charles was beginning his day with a routine that had become second nature over the past 6 months. The red boxes of state papers awaited his attention, filled with legislation requiring royal assent, diplomatic cables, and briefing notes on his upcoming state visit to Germany. Charles had found a rhythm to his reign that surprised even him. After decades of waiting, of preparing, of being criticized for his perceived reluctance to assume the crown, he had discovered that he genuinely enjoyed the weight of responsibility that came with being monarch. The constitutional role suited him, the careful balance of ceremony and substance that defined modern kingship. His private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered the study carrying the morning briefings and a schedule that would take Charles through a full day of audiences, meetings, and ceremonial duties. "Your Majesty," Sir Clive began, "the Prime Minister has requested a private audience this afternoon. Something about the upcoming Commonwealth Summit." Charles nodded absently, his attention caught by a particular dispatch in his morning papers. It was a routine report from the palace's genealogical office, part of an ongoing project to update the official royal family tree for the upcoming coronation anniversary celebrations. The irony was not lost on him that he was reviewing documents about his own bloodline, while unknown to him, his son was grappling with evidence that could invalidate that very lineage. Charles traced his finger along the family tree that showed his descent from Queen Victoria, through his great-great-grandmother, down through the generations to himself, and then to William and his children. It was a proud heritage, one that connected him to 1,000 years of English history. The thought that it might all be a carefully constructed fiction would have been incomprehensible to him. Back at Kensington Palace, William was making a decision that would change everything. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he had memorized but never used, the direct line to his Aunt Princess, and answered on the second ring, her voice brisk and efficient as always. "William, this is unexpected. Aunt," and William began, then stopped, realizing he had no idea how to begin this conversation. How do you tell someone that their brother's entire claim to the throne is illegitimate? Is something wrong? Anne's tone sharpened. As the Princess Royal, she had developed an instinct for detecting family crises. "I need to see you," William said finally. "Privately. It's about Granny, about something she left for me. Something about the family that, well, it changes everything." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. And was 73 years old enough to remember the early years of the Queen's reign, the struggles with producing an heir, the carefully managed privacy around royal pregnancies and births. "Come to Gatcombe this afternoon," she said quietly. "And William? Come alone." The drive to Princess Anne's estate in Gloucestershire gave William time to organize his thoughts, but also time for doubt to creep in. Was he making the right choice in involving Anne? Was he betraying his grandmother's trust by sharing the secret she had entrusted to him alone? But he needed counsel from someone who understood both the weight of royal duty and the complexities of family loyalty, and had spent her entire life balancing these competing demands. And If anyone could help him navigate this impossible situation, it would be her. Gatcombe Park sat quietly in the countryside, its stone facade weathered by centuries of English seasons, and met him at the door herself, dismissing the household staff with a gesture that made it clear they were not to be disturbed. They settled in her private sitting room, a comfortable space filled with photographs of horses and family members, trophies from her equestrian career, and books that reflected her wide-ranging interests. It was a room that spoke of a life fully lived, of someone who had found her own path despite the constraints of royal birth. Now, then, and said, settling into her chair with characteristic directness, "What's this about?" William withdrew the letter and documents from his briefcase, his hands steadier now than they had been 3 days ago. The weight of carrying this secret alone had nearly broken him, but sharing it would bring its own complications. "Granny left me this," he said, handing over the Queen's letter. Her final secret, and read in silence, her face betraying nothing of her inner thoughts. She had inherited the Queen's ability to maintain composure in the face of shocking revelations, a skill honed through decades of public service and personal crises. When she finished reading, she set the letter down carefully and looked at the medical documents. Her examination was thorough, methodical, and when she finally looked up at William, her expression was grim. "I remember," she said quietly. "I remember the trips to Switzerland when I was very young. Mother and father would disappear for long weekends, and we would be told they were visiting distant relatives. I was only 2 when Charles was born, but I have vague memories of the secrecy surrounding Mother's pregnancy, the way conversations would stop when children entered the room." William felt his heart sink. Ann's words were confirmation of what he had hoped might somehow be disproven. "You suspected?" he asked. "Not consciously," Ann replied. "But there were always questions, whispered rumors among the staff that were quickly silenced. And Charles, well, he was always different from the rest of us, not just in personality, but in appearance and temperament. We attributed it to his being the eldest, the heir, but now—" She gestured at the documents on the table between them. "Now it makes sense," William finished, and stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rolling hills that surrounded her estate. For several minutes, she said nothing, and William could see her working through the same calculations that had tormented him for days. "The question," she said finally, "is what we do now." William joined her at the window. "What would you do in my position?" And was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Your grandmother was brilliant, you know. By passing this to you rather than acting on it herself, she's given you the choice she couldn't make. She couldn't bear to destroy Charles, but she also couldn't bear to take the truth to her grave. That doesn't answer my question, doesn't it?" And turned to face him. "Charles is settled now, at peace with himself for the first time in decades. He's a good king, William. Whatever the circumstances of his birth, he's devoted his life to preparing for this role. Destroying that now would serve no one. But the legitimacy of the monarchy is built on more than bloodlines," and interrupted. "It's built on service, on dedication, on the consent of the people. Charles has earned his place through 74 years of preparation. That has to count for something." William saw the wisdom in her words, but they didn't ease the burden of carrying this secret. "So we do nothing? We let him continue to reign under false pretenses. We protect the institution," and said firmly, "and we protect the family. That's what your grandmother would have wanted, what she spent her entire reign doing." As William drove back to London that evening, Ann's words echoed in his mind. The decision she was advocating felt like the right one, but it came with its own moral complexities. How could he look at his father and pretend nothing had changed? How could he prepare his own children for roles that might be based on deception? But perhaps that was the price of being royal, living with impossible choices, carrying burdens that would crush ordinary people, making decisions that balance personal truth against public good. The lights of London appeared in the distance as William navigated the motorway home. Somewhere ahead, in Buckingham Palace, his father was concluding another day as King of England. unaware that his son now carried the power to destroy everything he had worked toward. The hidden will had been revealed, but its secrets would remain buried. The question was whether William could live with that choice, and whether the weight of his grandmother's revelation would slowly crush him under its enormous burden. The monarchy would survive, but the cost of that survival was only beginning to be understood. 2 weeks had passed since William's conversation with Princess, and the weight of the secret had begun to manifest itself in ways that those closest to him couldn't ignore. Catherine watched with growing concern as her husband struggled through his daily duties, his usual warmth replaced by a distant, troubled demeanor that seemed to grow worse with each passing day. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Sandringham, where 3 generations of the royal family had gathered for what should have been a pleasant weekend retreat. King Charles was in particularly good spirits, regaling them with stories from his recent state visit and sharing his plans for upcoming initiatives. William sat at the table, mechanically eating his meal, while his father spoke with enthusiasm about modernizing the monarchy and strengthening its connection to the people. "I've been thinking about the Commonwealth Summit next month," Charles was saying, his eyes bright with the passion he brought to causes close to his heart. "It's an opportunity to really demonstrate how the crown can serve as a unifying force in an increasingly divided world. The legitimacy we bring to these discussions," the word legitimacy hit William like a physical blow. He set down his fork with more force than necessary, the sound ringing against the china and causing everyone at the table to look in his direction. "William," Charles asked, concern creeping into his voice, "are you all right?" For a moment, William teetered on the edge of a precipice. The words were there, burning in his throat, the truth that could shatter his father's world with a few simple sentences. The medical records, the DNA evidence, the carefully documented proof that everything Charles believed about himself was a lie. "I'm fine," William managed, though his voice was strained. "Just tired." Catherine reached for his hand under the table, her touch a lifeline pulling him back from the brink of revelation. But Charles's keen eye caught the tension between them, the way William avoided direct eye contact, the subtle signs of distress that a father recognizes in his son. Later that evening, as the family dispersed to their various activities, Charles approached William in the library. The room was warm with the glow of reading lamps and the crackling fire in the stone hearth, a sanctuary where they had shared many conversations over the years. "Something's troubling you," Charles said without preamble, settling into the leather chair across from his son. "And don't tell me it's nothing. I've known you for 41 years, William. You're carrying something heavy." William looked up from the book he had been pretending to read, meeting his father's concerned gaze. For a heart-stopping moment, he almost told him everything. The love he saw in his father's eyes, the genuine concern for his well-being, made the deception feel unbearable. "It's complicated," William said finally. "Family usually is," Charles replied with a slight smile. "Is it about the children? About your role as heir? Sometimes the weight of expectation can feel overwhelming." The irony of his father's words was not lost on William. Charles was offering comfort about the burden of royal duty to the son who held the power to strip that duty away from him entirely. "How do you handle it?" William asked quietly, knowing that everything you do affects not just you, but the entire institution, knowing that one wrong decision could damage something that survived for 1,000 years. Charles was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the thoughtfulness that had characterized his approach to kingship. "I remind myself that the crown is bigger than any one person. My mother understood that. It's why she was able to serve for 70 years without letting personal desires override duty. We're custodians, William, not owners. Our job is to preserve and protect what we've inherited so we can pass it on stronger than we found it. And if you discovered that the very foundation of that inheritance was somehow flawed?" William asked, hating himself for the leading question, but needing to hear his father's thoughts. "Then I would remember that institutions built by human beings will always have human flaws," Charles said thoughtfully. "The British monarchy has survived because it adapts, because it serves something larger than the individuals who temporarily embody it. Whatever mistakes were made in the past, whatever imperfections exist in our history, they don't invalidate the good we can do in the present. William felt tears threatening for the first time since reading his grandmother's letter. His father's wisdom, his genuine dedication to service, made the secret even more painful to bear. This was a man who had earned his crown through decades of preparation and service, regardless of the circumstances of his birth. "You've always been the best of us, Dad," William said, the words catching in his throat. Charles reached across the space between their chairs and squeezed his son's shoulder. "We all do our best with what we're given, William. That's all anyone can ask." Meanwhile, unknown to both father and son, another conversation was taking place across the estate. Princess Anne had cornered Catherine in the morning room, where she was reviewing briefing notes for an upcoming charity engagement. "He's not handling this well," and said without preamble, her direct manner unchanged by the delicate nature of the situation. Catherine looked up, startled by Anne's sudden appearance and immediate reference to their shared knowledge of the Queen's revelation. They had not spoken since William's visit to Gatcombe Park, but Anne's keen observation skills had obviously detected the strain her nephew was under. "He barely sleeps," Catherine admitted quietly. "He sits up at night staring at those documents, as if reading them again might somehow change what they say," and settled into a chair across from Catherine, her expression troubled. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about the choice facing William. And I may have been wrong to counsel an action," and said slowly, "The burden of carrying this secret is destroying him. I can see it from across the room." Catherine set down her papers, giving Anne her full attention. "What are you suggesting?" "That perhaps there's a third option. Something between silence and revelation that might preserve both the institution and William's peace of mind." Before Catherine could ask for clarification, Anne's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at the screen, and her face went pale. "What is it?" Catherine asked, alarm creeping into her voice, and held up the phone, showing a news alert from a respected royal correspondent. The headline read, "Palace Sources, Questions Raised About Royal Succession Documents." It started and said grimly, "Someone's asking questions." The story, while carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, hinted at irregularities in historical royal genealogical records. It mentioned ongoing research by genealogists who had found discrepancies in official documentation from the 1950s and suggested that certain royal birth records might require clarification. Catherine felt her blood run cold. "Do you think someone knows about the letter?" "More likely someone knows about the medical records," Anne replied. "These things have a way of surfacing eventually. The Swiss clinic may have been discreet, but after 70 years, secrets have a way of finding the light." As if summoned by their conversation, William appeared in the doorway, his face grim with the same news alert on his own phone. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "All of us, including Dad." The suggestion hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. And Catherine exchanged glances, understanding that they had reached a point where inaction was no longer possible. "William," Catherine began carefully, "are you certain that's wise?" "Look at this," William said, holding up his phone. "Someone's already investigating. Whether it's a journalist following leads or a genealogist who's stumbled across inconsistencies, the truth is going to come out. The question is whether we control the revelation or let it control us." And stood and walked to the window, her military bearing evident in the straightness of her spine. "If we tell him now, privately, we might be able to manage the crisis. If it breaks publicly first, it could destroy not just Dad, but the entire monarchy," William finished. "At least if he knows, he can prepare. He can make informed decisions about how to handle whatever comes next." The three of them stood in silence, each understanding that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in the history of the British crown. The comfortable isolation of Sandringham, the peaceful weekend with family, had become a setting for a conversation that would change everything. "There's something else," Anne said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you during our first conversation." William, and Catherine turned to her expectantly. "I've done some research since you showed me the letter," and continued. "The Swiss clinic your grandmother visited, it was destroyed in a fire in 1987. All the records were supposedly lost. But I have contacts in the genealogical community, people who've been researching European royal bloodlines for decades." "What kind of contacts?" William asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Dr. Margaret Thornfield," and said. "She's been the royal family's unofficial genealogist for 30 years. Brilliant woman, absolutely trustworthy, but also absolutely thorough. She called me 2 days ago with questions about Charles's birth records. Apparently, she's been commissioned to create a comprehensive family tree for the Commonwealth Summit, and she's found inconsistencies." Catherine sank into her chair. "How long before she connects the dots?" "Based on what she told me, probably less than a week," and replied grimly. "She's already requested access to archived medical records from the period. If she finds even fragments of the original documentation, then the decision is made for us," William said with finality. "We tell Dad tonight, or we risk him learning about this from a news report or a genealogical study." The weight of inevitability settled over the three of them. The secret that Queen Elizabeth II had carried for 70 years, that she had passed to William just 2 weeks ago, was about to explode into the open whether they controlled it or not. "I need some time," William said finally, "to figure out how to tell him. How do you destroy someone's entire understanding of themselves and still leave them standing?" And moved to stand beside her nephew, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "You don't destroy him, William. You give him the truth, and you trust in the strength that made him a good king despite everything he's had to overcome." As the afternoon light faded over Sandringham, the three conspirators stood bound together by knowledge that would soon transform their family forever. Somewhere in the estate, Charles was likely reviewing state papers or tending to his correspondence, unaware that his son was preparing to shatter the foundation of everything he believed about himself. The hidden will of Queen Elizabeth II had set forces in motion that could no longer be contained. The only question now was whether the House of Windsor would survive the earthquake that was about to shake it to its core. Outside the morning room windows, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, silent witnesses to a family on the brink of its greatest crisis in generations. The peaceful evening at Sandringham would be the last normal moment they would share for a very long time. The conversation William had been dreading finally took place that Sunday evening in Charles's private study at Sandringham. The room felt smaller than usual, its familiar warmth replaced by a tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. William had requested the meeting immediately after dinner, asking for complete privacy, no staff, no interruptions, just father and son. Charles had sensed the gravity of the moment from William's demeanor. His son's face held the same expression he had worn as a boy when confessing to some serious mischief, but magnified 100-fold. The king settled into his leather chair, gesturing for William to take the seat across from him, the same chairs where they had shared so many conversations over the years. "Before you say anything," William began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "I need you to know that what I'm about to tell you comes from a place of love. Everything I'm going to share with you, everything Granny shared with me, was motivated by her love for you and her desire to protect you." Charles felt his stomach tighten. Any conversation that began with such careful preparation was bound to be devastating. "Just tell me, William, whatever it is." William withdrew the familiar envelope from his jacket pocket, the cream-colored parchment now showing wear from repeated handling. "Granny left me this. Her solicitor delivered it 2 weeks ago with explicit instructions that it was for my eyes only." He handed over the letter and watched his father's face as Charles recognized his mother's handwriting. The king's expression shifted from curiosity to concern as he noted the gravity with which William was treating this final correspondence from the Queen. Charles read in silence, his face growing progressively paler with each sentence. William watched as his father's world collapsed in real time. The slight tremor that began in his hands, the way his breathing became shallow, the moment when understanding dawned, and the King of England realized that his entire life had been built on a carefully constructed lie. When Charles finished reading the letter, he set it down with infinite care, as if it were made of glass. For a long moment, he simply stared at the document, his mind struggling to process the implications of his mother's final revelation. "The medical records," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. William handed over the yellowed papers from the Swiss clinic, the DNA analysis, and the supporting documentation that painted an undeniable picture of deception spanning 7 decades. Charles examined each document with the methodical precision he brought to state papers, but William could see the devastation building behind his father's carefully controlled expression. 74 years, Charles said eventually, his voice hollow. 74 years of believing I was someone I'm not. You are who you've always been, William said urgently, leaning forward in his chair. Your parentage doesn't change anything about the man you are, the king you've become, the father you've been to us. Charles looked up at his son with eyes that held a profound sadness. Doesn't it? Everything I've based my life on, everything I've believed about duty and heritage and divine right, it's all been a fiction. The only fiction was your biological parentage, William insisted. Everything else, your dedication, your service, your preparation for the crown, that was real. That was earned. But Charles was no longer listening. He had risen from his chair and was standing at the window, staring out at the darkened grounds of Sandringham. The estate had been in his family for generations, a tangible link to the heritage he now discovered might not truly be his. Does anyone else know? He asked without turning around. Aunt, and William admitted. And Catherine, but no one else in the family. And Dad, there might be others asking questions. Genealogists, researchers. The secret may not stay buried much longer. Charles turned back to face his son, and William was struck by how much his father seemed to have aged in the space of an hour. The confidence that had characterized his reign, the peace he had finally found in his role as king, had evaporated like morning mist. What do you think I should do? Charles asked, and the question broke William's heart. His father was asking him for guidance on whether to abdicate the throne. I think, William said carefully, that you should remember what you told me just hours ago in the library. You said the crown is bigger than any one person, that we're custodians, not owners. Nothing in these documents changes the fact that you've been an exemplary custodian. Built on a lie. Built on love, William corrected firmly. Granny and Grandpa were desperate for an heir. They took extraordinary measures to ensure the succession. Yes, but they did it to serve the nation, not themselves. And you spent your entire life proving worthy of what they sacrificed to give you. Charles returned to his chair, looking older and more fragile than William had ever seen him. The weight of kingship, which he had borne so gracefully for the past 6 months, now seemed to be crushing him. The constitutional implications, Charles murmured. If this becomes public knowledge, we'll face that together, William said. As a family, whatever comes next, whatever decisions need to be made, we'll make them together. The next morning brought no respite from the crisis. William woke to find 17 missed calls on his secure phone, all from Sir Clive Alderton, his father's private secretary. The final message was urgent enough to send William racing to Buckingham Palace before dawn. He found Sir Clive in a state of barely controlled panic in the palace's crisis management center, a room William had hoped never to see activated. Banks of phones rang constantly while palace staff coordinated what was clearly a major emergency response. What's happened? William demanded. Sir Clive handed him a tablet displaying the morning edition of the Times. The headline made William's blood run cold. Royal genealogist raises questions about king's parentage. Exclusive document analysis suggests irregularities in 1950s birth records. The story was devastating in its detail and damning in its implications. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the genealogist and had mentioned, had somehow gained access to fragments of medical records from the Swiss clinic. While she hadn't seen the complete documentation that William possessed, She had found enough evidence to raise serious questions about Charles's biological parentage. How did she get this information? William asked, though he dreaded the answer. We're still investigating, Sir Clive replied grimly. But it appears that when the clinic was destroyed in 1987, not all the records were lost. Some were archived in a university medical library in Geneva. Dr. Thornfield has been researching European royal bloodlines for a book she's writing, and she stumbled across references to the House of Windsor. William sank into a chair as the full scope of the disaster became clear. The secret was out, but in the worst possible way, through incomplete information that raised questions without providing answers, creating maximum confusion and speculation. "Where's my father?" he asked. "In his private study. He's been there since 4 this morning, meeting with constitutional lawyers and senior advisors. The Prime Minister is flying back from Brussels as we speak." William made his way through the palace corridors, past staff members whose faces reflected the same barely contained panic he had seen in Sir Clive. This was uncharted territory, a constitutional crisis unlike any in the monarchy's 1,000-year history. He found Charles surrounded by lawyers, advisors, and senior members of the palace household. The king looked like a man who had aged 10 years overnight, his face drawn and his eyes haunted. When he saw William enter, he dismissed the room with a gesture, leaving father and son alone with the weight of their shared knowledge. "It's worse than I thought it would be," Charles said without preamble. "The constitutional experts are split. Half think I should abdicate immediately to prevent further damage to the institution. The other half think abdication would validate the accusations and do even more harm. What do you think?" William asked, settling into a chair across from his father. "I think I've been living a lie for 74 years, and now that lie is destroying everything my mother spent her life building." Charles's voice was bitter in a way William had never heard before. "The geneticist, Dr. Thornfield, she doesn't have the complete picture," William said. "She's working from fragments, making educated guesses. We could challenge her findings, demand more rigorous proof." "With what?" "Our own DNA evidence that proves she's right." Charles laughed bitterly. "William, there's no way out of this that doesn't involve either lies or devastation." The conversation was interrupted by Sir Clive's urgent return. "Your Majesty, the Prime Minister has requested an emergency audience. The opposition is already calling for a parliamentary investigation into the succession. And the Speaker of the House has indicated that if questions about your Majesty's legitimacy cannot be resolved quickly, Parliament may need to address the constitutional crisis formally." William felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. This was no longer just a family crisis or even a constitutional question. It was becoming a political disaster that could topple not just the monarchy, but potentially the government itself. "How long do we have?" Charles asked quietly. "Hours, not days," Sir Clive replied grimly. "The story is spreading across social media faster than we can manage it. International news outlets are picking it up. The palace press office is being overwhelmed with requests for comment." Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where tourists were already gathering despite the early hour. They came to see the symbol of British tradition and stability, unaware that inside these walls, that very symbol was crumbling. "Schedule the audience with the Prime Minister," he said finally, "and convene an emergency session of the Privy Council. If we're going to face this crisis, we'll face it with transparency and dignity." As Sir Clive left to make the arrangements, William approached his father. "Dad, whatever you decide, I want you to know that my respect for you, our love for you, that hasn't changed. The man who raised me, who taught me about duty and service, who's been such an exemplary king these past 6 months. That man is real, regardless of what some medical records for 1952 might say." Charles turned from the window, and for the first time since reading his mother's letter, William saw a flicker of the strength that had defined his character. "Thank you," Charles said simply. "That means more to me than you could possibly know." Outside the palace walls, the first protesters were beginning to gather, their signs calling for everything from constitutional reform to abolition of the monarchy. The crisis that had begun with a grandmother's secret letter was now threatening to reshape the British political landscape forever. The hidden will of Queen Elizabeth II had finally been fully revealed, and its consequences were only beginning to unfold. Whatever happened next would determine not just the fate of the House of Windsor, but the future of the constitutional monarchy itself. In the distance, Big Ben chimed the hour, its ancient voice marking time as it had for generations of royal crises. But this time, the chimes seemed to toll with particular gravity, as if the clock itself understood that it was witnessing a moment that would define British history for generations to come. 6 months after the revelation that shook the monarchy to its core, King Charles III stood in the same study at Buckingham Palace where he had first learned the truth about his parentage. The crisis that had threatened to destroy the House of Windsor had transformed into something none of them could have predicted, a renewal that strengthened rather than weakened the Crown's connection to the British people. The constitutional crisis had been resolved through a combination of legal precedent, parliamentary wisdom, and public support that surprised even the most optimistic royal advisors. The Prime Minister had worked with constitutional scholars to establish that legitimacy of rule in a constitutional monarchy derived not from bloodline alone, but from the consent of Parliament and the people. Charles's 7 decades of preparation, his dedication to service, and his exemplary conduct as king had earned him a legitimacy that transcended genetics. Parliament had voted overwhelmingly to confirm Charles's right to the throne, with even Republican members acknowledging that stability served the nation better than constitutional upheaval. The vote had been 421 to 157 in the House of Commons, with similar margins in the House of Lords. More surprisingly, public opinion polls had shown that 68% of British citizens supported Charles remaining as king, viewing his biological parentage as irrelevant to his fitness to rule. The revelation had sparked a national conversation about what the monarchy meant in the 21st century, but rather than weakening the institution, it had humanized it in ways that decades of carefully managed public relations could never have achieved. The image of a king who had learned devastating news about himself, but chose to continue serving his people had resonated deeply with a public that understood personal struggle and resilience. William had been instrumental in managing the crisis, his steady support of his father becoming a defining image of the entire ordeal. The photograph of father and son walking together through the palace gardens the day after the story broke, clearly in deep conversation, but facing the crisis together, had become iconic. It showed a royal family that could weather devastating revelations while maintaining their essential humanity. The most unexpected development had come from Charles himself. Rather than being broken by the revelation, he had found a kind of liberation in the truth. The man who had spent his entire life carrying the weight of royal expectation discovered that his worthiness for the crown came not from his bloodline, but from his character and commitment to service. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to what I thought was expected of someone born to be king, he had said in the television address that effectively ended the crisis. Now I understand that being king has nothing to do with the circumstances of your birth and everything to do with how you choose to serve. I choose to continue serving you, not because of who my biological father might have been, but because of who I have become through 7 decades of preparation for this role. The speech had been watched by 47 million people in Britain and hundreds of millions more worldwide. The combination of vulnerability and determination in Charles's words had shifted public opinion decisively in his favor. Here was a monarch who had faced the ultimate test of character and emerged stronger for it. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the genealogist whose research had triggered the crisis, had become an unexpected ally. Her complete investigation, conducted with full access to the palace archives and the remaining Swiss clinic records, had produced a comprehensive report that confirmed the Queen's letter while also documenting the extraordinary measures Elizabeth and Philip had taken to ensure the succession. The report portrayed their actions not as deception, but as sacrifice for the greater good of the nation. They gave up their own peace of mind to ensure the stability of the realm, Dr. Thornfield had written in her conclusion. And they raised a son who, regardless of genetics, embodied every quality one could want in a monarch. The genealogist's work had also uncovered something else. Evidence that Queen Elizabeth had spent decades ensuring that Charles would be worthy of the crown, whether by blood or by merit. Letters between the Queen and Charles's tutors, military instructors, and mentors revealed a careful program of education and character development designed to prepare him for kingship regardless of the circumstances of his birth. William had found these letters particularly moving. They showed a mother who had carried an enormous burden of guilt, but had channeled that guilt into ensuring her son would be the best king possible. Every opportunity she had given Charles, every responsibility she had gradually transferred to him, had been part of a long-term plan to establish his legitimacy through merit rather than birthright. The crisis had also brought the family closer together in unexpected ways. Princess Anne had become Charles's most vocal supporter during the parliamentary debates, her testimony about her brother's character and dedication helping to sway several crucial votes. Even Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, whose relationships with Charles had sometimes been complicated, had rallied around him with public statements of support. Most importantly for William, the revelation had resolved his own internal struggle with the secret. The burden that had nearly crushed him for weeks had been transformed into a source of pride in his father's character. Watching Charles face the truth with dignity and emerge stronger had taught William valuable lessons about leadership, resilience, and the true meaning of royal duty. Catherine had played a crucial behind-the-scenes role in managing the family's response to the crisis. Her experience as a former journalist had been invaluable in understanding how the story would develop and what information needed to be released when. Her steady support of William during his darkest moments had also reminded him that the monarchy's strength came not just from individual character, but from the bonds of family and shared commitment. The children had been told an age-appropriate version of the story, emphasizing that family love and commitment mattered more than genetics. Prince George, at 10 years old, had surprised everyone with his mature response. So Grandpa Charles is king because he earned it, not just because he was born to it? That's actually better. The international reaction had been largely positive, with other constitutional monarchies expressing support for Charles's decision to remain on the throne. The Spanish, Belgian, and Swedish royal families had all issued statements praising the British monarchy's handling of the crisis. Several Republican leaders had even acknowledged that Charles's response to the revelation demonstrated the kind of character that made him worthy of his role. Now, 6 months later, Charles was preparing for the most significant ceremony of his reign, a formal recommitment service at Westminster Abbey. It would not be another coronation, but rather a public affirmation of his dedication to serve, witnessed by representatives of Parliament, the Commonwealth, and the British people. The service had been Charles's idea, his way of acknowledging that his legitimacy came not from ancient ceremony, but from contemporary consent. William would play a central role in the service, publicly affirming his support for his father's reign and his own commitment to the succession. The speech he had prepared was deeply personal, acknowledging the crisis while celebrating the strength it had revealed in both his father and the institution they served. 6 months ago, William's speech began, our family faced a truth that could have destroyed us. Instead, it revealed something even more powerful than royal blood, royal character. My father has shown that true kingship is not inherited but earned, not assumed but proven. He has faced the ultimate test of leadership and emerged not weakened but strengthened. The ceremony would also include the formal presentation of a new constitutional document, drafted by Parliament in consultation with the palace, that clarified the modern basis of royal legitimacy. The document established that fitness to rule in a constitutional monarchy was determined by character, preparation, and public consent rather than solely by bloodline, a principle that would guide the monarchy for generations to come. As Charles prepared for the Westminster service, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. The revelation that should have destroyed him had instead liberated him from doubts that had plagued him his entire life. For the first time, he truly understood that he was king not because of accident of birth, but because of who he had chosen to become. The Queen's letter, which had seemed like a devastating betrayal when William first shared it with him, now felt like a final gift from a mother who had understood something he had not. That true legitimacy comes from service, not bloodline. By forcing the truth into the open, she had given him the opportunity to prove his worthiness in the most definitive way possible. William had grown into his role as heir with new confidence, understanding that his own future reign would be built on the solid foundation of merit and service that his father had established. The succession was now more secure than it had been before the crisis, grounded not in ancient precedent but in contemporary validation. The hidden will of Queen Elizabeth II had been fully revealed, its secrets exposed, and its implications faced. The royal family had survived the ultimate test of their character and emerged stronger for it. The monarchy that Charles would pass to William would be one renewed by truth rather than weakened by deception. As the sun set over London on the eve of the recommitment ceremony, for generations of the House of Windsor gathered at Buckingham Palace. Charles and William stood together on the balcony overlooking them all, watching the crowds that had gathered to show their support. "Thank you," Charles said quietly to his son, "for everything, for your courage in bringing me the truth, for your support through the crisis, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." "Thank you," William replied, "for showing me what it really means to be worthy of the crown." Below them, the British people had gathered not to witness the pageantry of ancient tradition, but to celebrate something more powerful, the renewal of a bond between crown and country based on character, service, and mutual respect. The hidden will had been revealed, and its legacy was not destruction but renewal, not weakness but strength, not the end of a dynasty but its rebirth. The House of Windsor would continue, not because of who its members were born to be, but because of who they had chosen to become. And in that choice, both the monarchy and the nation had found something worth preserving, a partnership between sovereign and people built on the solid foundation of earned trust and proven worth. The crisis that began with a grandmother's letter had ended with a family and a nation stronger than before, bound together by truth rather than tradition, by merit rather than birthright. The hidden will of Queen Elizabeth II had given her son the greatest gift of all, the chance to prove himself truly worthy of the crown he wore.